Hello.
What up, everybody?
Y'all there? We are live. It's our first YouTube live.
It is. It's our first YouTube live.
So bear with us. Got some folks joining us right now. Hi, everybody.
Well, let's just see. Dimitri J, where are we at? We're in Denver, Colorado.
Isaac says, yo, hey, hi. Okay. We can't respond to every single person. But yeah, today we're sitting here in Denver. We're wanting to talk to you guys a little bit about No Enemies. We'll be reading your questions as they come in. We also kind of put the question before doing this. We wanted to hear what No Enemies actually means to you all. But let's just give everybody a chance to get here. So what's the furthest away of anybody on right now? If you think you're further away than anybody else, let us know. What do we got?
Let's not update real quick on my phone. UK.
Okay, we got
Wales. Let's move this closer. Let's get in close, y'all.
Yeah,
there we go. Fantastic. All right, is that a bit better? Cool. South Dakota.
Is South Dakota further than?
I do not think it is. I do not think it is, but I'm just giving a shout out to that Josh Andrews in South Dakota. Wait, we're in Italy. Austria, Cornwall, more UK.
Texas. Hey, I was born in Texas. Shout out to Texas.
Ontario.
Even though people like to hate.
New Zealand, that might take it.
Colombia. Oh, Japan. Where in Japan are you, Isaac? Nihon no doko. Uh-oh, we lost you for a second.
All right, so we want to talk about No Enemies. First of all, it's the name of our latest album. And we didn't name it No Enemies because we thought it was something easy. Right? Honestly, we thought it was actually the exact opposite of how we'd even been trained. We feel like even as activists, it's almost always us versus them. Like you're kind of problematizing some other person in order to give your movement some teeth. You have to have something to push against in order to kind of build momentum. That's kind of like a common just belief. And we started wondering, is that necessary? And so even when we started saying No Enemies, was kind of a challenge to ourselves to be like, can we do that? Can we stop problematizing other human beings and start kind of thinking about, is this an issue for us instead of just us versus them?
Well, I remember when you first even told me the phrase, I wasn't on, I pushed back, like I wasn't fully on board. It was even before we were even talking about the album. You just said, I think you'd been to like a workshop on movement building and how you can take any small issue or movement and make it big. And you said, what is our movement? If there was going to be one movement that we were going to push, what would it be? Yeah, I think it would be No Enemies. And I was like, what about, after you legitimately have a threat that you have to face, what about, and so there's a lot of just wrestling between the two of us to even get to the point where it could fully resonate. But do you remember that moment?
Yeah, I remember it. And I think it was also echoed because even when I shared it with you, because I went through the exact same process myself. I'm like, man, do I mean that? What does that mean? Does that mean that we don't have people working against us? Does that mean that we don't have antagonists? Does that mean that we don't actually have people who are wishing us ill and working against everything that we're putting forward? And I just started looking deeper and stuff like that. It's like, well, no, it doesn't mean that we don't have people working against us. It just means that we refuse to make the people the problem entirely, kind of thing.
Well, and I remember in that first conversation, you were also talking about both meanings, because there's NO enemies, but also know your enemies. And the more you're actually able to kind of anticipate the tactics of somebody else and see things from their perspective, the more you're able to plan. And I think so much what happens right now is people have someone, even if you're dead set against, that's my enemy, they are my enemy, and I'm going to defend myself against my enemy. I'm always going to see them as an enemy. If you don't have empathy, if you don't actually appreciate the enemy's perspective and you just make them into something flat, make into something that's
poverty, take transphobia. take misogyny. That if at any point in time we can take like one person and feel that person we're going, because we're actually talking about systems. So I think when we're talking about like no enemies, it's like let's target appropriately, right? Because I think too many times we start dividing ourselves, like people who should be here and people who shouldn't, and we feel like you're ultimately kind of dividing your tribe, and then we're not actually able to like attain any kind of victory by saying like, well, how do we deal with poverty? Because it's not just like one or two rich people that like if you're able to somehow eliminate them, that you'd eliminate the system of poverty. Like any of these things, we're kind of like somehow making it too basic.
And it makes sense though, because I mean, we're trained through our culture, and we're trained through movies, and you know, if you want a compelling movie, generally you have to have a bad guy, you have to have a villain.
Yes.
And I know you nerd out about this a lot. I'd be curious what your thinking is on like on villains in movies and how it trains us.
All right. I mean, a bunch of y'all probably, Jamie and I, we watch all of the Marvel movies because we've been Marvel heads since we're like 7 or 8 years old.
This is beyond our wildest dreams.
Yeah.
At age 15, I remember being like, I hope one day they'll make a Spider-Man movie.
Maybe.
And you'll see him in 3 dimensions swinging on his web.
It would be crazy. I don't know how they pull it off because at that point in time, like CG hadn't even really been that well established before Jurassic Park came out.
If you had told us Rocket Raccoon, Legion, I know it's not MCU, but it's dope. If you had told us, what's the most extreme one? Every time we go see a Marvel movie, I'll be like, all right, what character would you go crazy if you saw them?
Yeah.
And I think almost like Beta Ray Bill has appeared.
Yeah.
I mean, his head appeared.
Yeah.
The Watcher was always my answer.
Yeah. Bam.
Yeah, there's going to be a 15-year-old Jamie and stuff. And there's going to be a Spider-Man movie. There's going to be a billion Spider-Man movies. The best one will be called Homecoming. It'll come out in 2016, 17. But there'll be many. And anyway, we digress.
We digress. But at the same time, so we watched these movies. Like we were so excited for them. Before Infinity War came out, we actually had like, how long was that sleepover? Like,
it was all of the hours that it takes to watch it. 38 hours.
38 hours. We watched
2 days.
All of the MCU movies back to back to back to back.
They all played.
They all played in one interrupted session. All right. That's what we did to prepare for Infinity War. So, but like one of the things is like growing up and looking at these things, we're like, well, is the answer always just to punch something?
Right.
Like, it's what do the movies say if that's what we are like as a culture all absorbing now? It's like, like it's fun, it's the folklore, it's the mythology of our nation right now, kind of a thing. And at the same time, I think it's kind of reducing some of our problems to like, well, you just have to hit it harder, kind of a thing. And at the same time, like what you have to do is you have to set up a villain who is so obviously deserving getting punched that everybody roots for the heroes when that happens, kind of a thing. And that's cool, but that rarely actually happens in real life. It's rarely that cut and dry. And it feels like if we keep on telling these stories, then even in the news, we need stuff to be that kind of cut and dry.
That's our appetite.
That's our appetite. We want it. We want like, no, who's right, who's wrong. And at the same time, what that does is doesn't say like who's human and what kind of help do they need. And when we say no enemies, it's a challenge for us to ourselves to kind of insist on the humanity of every dynamic, of every problem. And then we're kind of like hoping if we can, even while we're enjoying ourselves and all these other things, kind of be like, yes, and.
I'd be curious. We lost the chat for a second here, but I mean, you know, we titled our album No Enemies. We talk about this from time to time, but I'm kind of curious if other people had that same reaction when they saw the title. If they're just like immediately on board, if you were like, yeah, right. Because we have friends, you know, when we were promoting the album, the Kickstarter campaign, we reached out to people and said, hey, can you make a video for us? And there were a few people that wrote back like, I can't make a video because I got enemies, man. I got enemies.
Yes.
And I think the pushback is important. It shouldn't just be like, oh, yeah, no enemies.
No.
You know, because that's too easy. I'm curious what people, let's see some reactions here.
Well, somebody's asking for a breakdown.
Faces are off. Please don't look directly at Cam. All right, it seems
ignore that. All right, so break down the Thanos song a little bit.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know the Thanos with. I realized was this this is like weeks later. I think it was so effective at like immersing us in. I realized like that was a feeling that I'd had before, and it was actually it was an electoral defeat. And for me, that's what the 2016 election was. Was just this is what kind of the unthinkable defeat can feel like, and that might just be how I felt. But the other half of that is the idea that like half our people are dead to us. That like we have cousins and relatives and friends that suddenly we just are like, I'm unfriending you, I'm not speaking to you, I don't want to be associated with you. And I don't know if that's making someone your enemy, as much as it is just like cleaning up your brand and being like, I don't want to be connected to these people who are kind of toxic in this way that I've deemed them. But all of that felt like it was right for for a song that just kind of like took those emotions seriously a little bit while having some fun at the same time.
And to answer some of the questions that are also kind of going around, I'm seeing right now there's so much going on in the world. It's just the right time for us to be writing all the time. There's so many things to respond to. So we don't know necessarily when a new album is coming out, but we're working on new music, and we're hoping to be releasing that music fairly on a regular basis. So it's not going to be 2 years before you hear like a new Flobots song. We hope that's exciting for you, because it's exciting for us to be writing right now. Let's see.
What do we got here? Okay. We'll try to get some articles back up on the Flobots site.
We'll make sure to pass that the hi to Kenny and Mackenzie. Yeah, man. There's just been so much stuff going on. Don't you all agree?
One of the reasons we want to talk about No Enemies now is because, like I said, it's a simple thing to say. It's easy to just kind of like, and even some of the responses we got from people who don't disagree with that at all. I think there's a lot of things we would all agree with if we hear them in the abstract, but it is hard to do. I mean, I think it's in your day-to-day life, it's hard to not like make your co like they keep doing that annoying thing. So you can have those really interpersonal like antagonisms that kind of become the person you rant about at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But there's also just, I think it's right now, it's really hard to not see certain people as enemies. People, I mean, for us, I think like people that are separating children, that feels like an enemy, people that are, continuing to enforce policies that are really hurt marginalized people. That feels like an enemy. Someone who's denying climate change in a way that like recklessly places us all in danger. Those feel like enemies. And so I think it's important to like take that seriously, the fact that we do have opponents and antagonists and people that we're going to face off with and disagree with. But it's about that we're all here for some reason, and that we're all created for some reason, and we all have like a best self that we can be. But at the same time, like in the process of wrestling with people to be those better selves, it can be hard to hold that vision. Absolutely. It can be hard to believe like, oh, they're really at some point could be redeemed.
Yeah, and even with that redemption, someone is asking, like, can you explain what does fight with tools mean? And we feel like in some ways, like fight with tools and no enemies are kind of siblings, because we feel like some of the tools that we're talking about are like all these different gifts and abilities that we all have, that if we're able to find the right place for them, then we're able to, in some ways, like build up a new world or a future that we can actually be proud of, that includes our stories and the stories of those that are different than us. And we feel like one of the tools also is being able to insist that somebody who is your antagonist is also human. And we feel like that's actually one of the hardest things to do, but it's one of the most beautiful things to do. I think that's one of the things why like, I mess with a show like Avatar: The Last Airbender so hard. I love that at the end, I'm hoping I'm not spoiling this for anybody, but like Aang decides that like, even when the whole world and all the wisest people in the world are telling him that he needs to strike down this adversary, he's like, no, I don't think I do. And I feel like that's a beautiful message that we're not like hearing enough, that there's always innovation in insisting on people's humanity. And it's not easy. And that's one of the things that we're kind of working on. Let me see.
What do we got here? Depends on how you define enemies. I think it's healthy to have discussions and disagreements, but we need to be able to listen to our enemies and understand others' views.
Yeah,
that's true. I mean, you could say antagonist or whatever. You could use different words for it, but I think the reason we use enemy is because I think there is this really real like attachment to having enemies. I think we're addicted to them.
Yeah. And it's also kind of like, in some ways, it's fun.
Yeah.
When you have somebody that you're like really raging against, or somebody that you really hate. And the other thing is, it takes a whole lot of energy to maintain that relationship. And maybe it takes a little bit less energy to be like, okay, well, what's the information behind that pain that your enemy is expressing, kind of a thing. Because I think that there's always information. And then at the same time, it also means like we also have to be like taking our own safety very seriously.
Right.
If somebody's like, it doesn't mean like, hey, that doesn't mean that you're going to be safe. Like I feel like there's a whole other thing about like trying to maintain different parameters, but at the same time, like always looking like what else.
Right. Yeah, there's the surface level around the. It's not just. I think we like enemies because we like being right, and it's a really intoxicating feeling to be right and to feel self-righteous. Like I've had that a long day, some Samantha Bee, and just feel like all this righteous anger. And let me just, so I think there's entire industries made that are catered to us to kind of like, so we can feel right. MSNBC, you'll watch the one station that is gonna give you this like worldview that will support yours. And so that I think on that surface level, there's this real addiction to like vilifying the enemy. But the safety thing is something that we've wrestled with a lot, because if you take that and extend that, if you and your family are at risk from policies people are putting in place, it's hard not to experience that as an enemy. We had some conversations about safety recently and how that factors in, because we go to a lot, we end up at a lot of college campuses. We end up talking to lots of group of people about this stuff. Yeah. And we try to think what is responsible to say.
All the time.
And maybe I could say a little bit about what your thoughts are on safety, and even just what you were taught about safety.
Yeah, well, because you'll see just like right now, there's just so much energy being spent on, invalidating the other side. Just right off the bat, like saying certain words to make people feel, or to show that their position is worthless. And there's been like a whole bunch of criticism around safe spaces and things like that. And there's been lots of language around snowflakes and things like that. And it's we have to know when people are trying to just like to divide. But then also when we're talking about safety, like when Jamie and I are talking about, we just realize our experiences are so different. Because like for me, my family, my parents told me that I would never be safe. Like they're just like, no, that's not gonna, like how it might be like when Jamie would sleep over and all those things. Like his reality will be different. Like they had to teach me how to kind of like live defensively, because I was never guaranteed safety anywhere in this country, kind of a thing. And what I thought was kind of interesting when we were talking about it is that for me, that didn't feel like a pressure. It felt like I had like this different perspective and these different tools to keep myself safe. And my family like trained me in that at all points in time. I don't know how many of y'all got this, but like my parents would talk to me all the time about how you talk to police, like how you keep yourself safe in these situations, and that every one of those encounters is a place where your freedom could be taken away from you. And that's just like how I grew up, like the way that you teach other kids like to stay away from open flames and such. I was taught like how to navigate and negotiate with a world that might not be set up for me. And it's just real interesting thinking that we all have different. It's very important to realize that even when we're talking about safety, we are talking about different narratives and different life experiences for everyone. And it's not like one set of rules and grammar that will make anybody feel comfortable. It always has to be, we have to be accountable to each other.
The only conversation I remember about safety was my mom being like, hey, be careful in that tree. And I was careful.
Yeah.
So it was a little different.
It
was a little bit different growing up. By the way, we've known each other since I was in the 5th grade. He was in the 4th grade. We were 10 years old.
Oh my goodness! Somebody's asking, "Is that what Buried Alive is about?" And yes, yeah, it's a lot about that, honestly. And you'll find a lot of the album "No Enemies" is dealing with those things. And we felt like one of the differences that we did with "No Enemies" is like most of the stories that we're telling are actually from a personal perspective. So even in songs like "Failure Games," we're talking about real losses. Like my verse is about a very real person. His name was Marshawn, who was an incredible activist who ended up taking his life, and just how a lot of us in the activist community felt like we could have done more. And if we'd been more present, we lost one of our leaders because, for many different reasons, but like if I'd made one more phone call, if I'd been aware that he was overtaxed and overstressed, those kind of things. We felt like with No Enemies, we just tried to take the political and make it personal with each of the songs.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think also it's so easy to get lost in the kind of like the rancor of like online battles. I mean, I'm on Twitter. Get into some of those threads that people get into. I can enjoy some of those back and forths, but when it gets to the point that people are it's not like even trolling. It's like, okay, if it's true trolling, you're just trolling, right? And if it's true, if you're trying to actually have a conversation, but there's this in between that's like where we're always kind of trolling as we're having the conversation, and you kind of take it as a given that like we just hate each other as a default, or that we're battling and we're enemies as a default. I think that's so bad for us, and I think that it's like we're all expecting each other to always be in battle mode at full strength. And I think what's so often more true is that we're all very weak, and we're all like going through stuff that other people don't see. And you might be having this often or just reason, and then suddenly this other set of things happens, and you're like, okay, well, where do I go now? And so I think you never know what other people are going through, and you never know someone else's story. And I think all that relates to the need to be like, all right, if your goal is to pigeonhole everybody and pre-categorize them, then it kind of takes away the point of us being people.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to be looking out for each other.
Absolutely. And so much of the stuff we're feeling like at this point in time as musicians, as artists, as educators, like so much of the stuff that actually worked for us in second and third grade is actually what we're looking for in community. It's like some of these basic things that we get trained out of, like what Jamie's talking about, like looking out for other people, listening, responding, and being interested. And it's just so many of these things. I feel like that we push into children, and then we say like, no, as adults, no, like no, you don't share. It's kind of fascinating that like there's, as we grow up, we get taught like stop sharing, stop dreaming, stop imagining, stop working together. And so some of this stuff is kind of like, let's get back to some playground rules. Let's It's okay to have fun. And something else that we've been looking for now, we're trying to, and like, so when we have shows coming up, we're trying to bring in more of this. It's just like ways to see each other. It's one thing for us to be up on stage, and we've been doing that for a while. Like now we want to try to inject things within our show that make everybody within that room visible to each other, so we can feel like we're there. What we're doing is real, and that like everybody in that room is visible and their stories matter. And like, because we can't tell you how much we are honored by any of you being on this live stream, by any of you who's bought an album or anybody who's come to a show. It means the world to us. And we don't take it for granted. And that's why we're also saying we're working on new music, because we want to honor that kind of attention and that time. We want to make sure it's worth it. And we hope that anything that we're giving you will also not just be food for thought, but food for spirit. And maybe we'll come back to us in some sort of feedback where you'll give us some sort of like line or quote, and that might be the next song for us.
And our first album, Fight with Tools, I think that's probably how a lot of people did, and first heard about us. And we talked a lot at that point about like what are the tools that we have that we don't utilize? What are the tools that you have? That whatever you're doing at your day job, that might or might not be something that is exciting for you. But you have one way or the other. You have some passion, some tool, or some skill that has an ability to be applied to make the world better around you. These days, some tools that it feels like people just are tired of using, or just no one wants to use, or even consider using, would be things like forgiveness, right?
Yes.
Like, I think that seems. Hard left, hard right. Everyone thinks that's just sort of naive. Everyone thinks it's sort of like, oh, you're gonna really believe the other side enough to like give them an inch. No, you shouldn't do that. So it's crazy that like No Enemies feels very, very like countercultural and radical right now. Forgiveness feels like utterly countercultural, and we feel this obligation to kind of push these things that we think are actually quite vital. And so we want to bring it into our show. So if you come to our show, you'll feel not just, oh, we connected with the band, but we want you to connect with each other, and we want you to connect with like these kind of lost arts and technologies. I'm wondering if we want to just put the call out, maybe take another 5 minutes and do some like if you guys have some random questions.
Well, I saw one that was about like, how do you all feel about piracy as content creators? I have a lot of ideas about that.
Well, a lot of times, if you're roaming the seas to begin with,
Yes.
like, you're going to grow up a certain way. That's going to be the culture that you see as right.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
on the 7 seas.
Yeah, and if you don't have one nation whose flag you fight underneath, you'll end up banding together.
But is that what pirate does?
Well, I'll look it up.
But as far as
probably
like,
some.
As far as like piracy as content creators, one of the things for me is I feel like there's a huge difference between the heart of the art and the industry of the art. And usually when we're talking about piracy as content creators, we're talking about the industry of the art. Because in some ways I try to look at like what has music been forever. And like so many songs like before the industry, you're like, oh yeah, this is a tune from this point and we've changed the tune over a point in time and now it's this song. It's only when like you're trying to monetize everything that you're talking about like this industry and content creation. And in this day and age when it's really hard for musicians to make a living, I'm going to say something that's not very popular. I don't care about piracy.
We want you to hear our music. And we want to keep making music. So we also need to be sustainable. So, hey, if you just want to pirate some songs, buy some merch. Come to our show. You just give us money randomly.
Well,
appreciation.
But also, like, if you're pirating and you dig the stuff, find some way to like kick it back to that band in a way that will really benefit them. Buying merch is a great way to kind of like get that money right to them. Find ways that you can connect. Join their Patreon, something that like maybe is not necessarily so connected to the industry, but to them. Find ways to really support folks. If any of these things, if you're pirating the stuff and you love it, then make that love known and kind of show that support. And I feel like that's the big difference. Like, show up for these people that you say that you like, that you really love. And we can be creative in how we do that. But you should support people who are giving you something, right? So that's kind of how we feel about it.
And there's people, there's musicians that dedicate a lot of their time to figuring out how to make the industry more just. We tend to be more focused on kind of the communities around us. That's not our main thing to think about, but there's good people putting a lot of thought into that. We do have a newsletter though, for real. If you guys, we'd love you to sign up. And we do have No Enemies vinyl coming in.
Well, No Enemies vinyl is still available on the website.
Right. Sorry, you can order it now.
And the patches are still there on the website too. We're going to be having some new stuff coming in the next 2 or 3 months, so stay tuned.
25 more vinyl copies. 25 more vinyl copies.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Let's see what we got.
Let's see. Thank you, Under the Rock, for talking about the No Enemies thing. We really appreciate that as well. Let me see. Are there any more questions?
Someone said, "Do we make money off Spotify?" What zeros? Yeah, something above zero, but very close to zero. But it adds up. It all I think honestly, just whatever platform you're using, however it is you get music, just spread the word about us. It always helps.
Yeah, I mean, years ago we had a show in Denmark. Our label messed up and they didn't have the album released in Europe legally. And so when we got to Denmark, there was like 30 people there. And then I asked from the stage, like, how many of y'all got the album off of Pirate Bay? And it was all 30. But that's an example. Like, they pirated the album and they showed up for the show. And our label didn't even do the right amount of work. So like, there's one of those things about like, how do we get the message out there? And then like you come up and show and support, that really makes a big difference. And it was a fun show for us.
I feel like if Oscar writes it one more time, we're going to come to Colombia.
Yes.
No. Nos encantaría venir a Colombia, pero no sé si vamos a ir.
Do you feel that your new work will cross lines and open minds, or is it more of a message to the disempowered?
Right. I like that question. I like the question to see those as separate things. I mean, I think that each one, I mean, everybody, regardless of what power we think we do have that ability to cross lines. And I think that can feel powerful. But there certainly are moments where like you need solace before you have the ability to sort of reach out. The real answer is I don't know. It depends on the song. But I think both of those are important things.
And I think a lot of times, it's kind of an act of faith. Was it Margaret Atwood that said the ultimate act of optimism is releasing a book because you're hoping that somebody will actually read it and like it and enjoy it? So in any of our songs, we're hoping that it does communicate something that's useful to folks. But I think what we're hoping for is like we'd like to have a yes to both. We hope that the people who are feeling disempowered will find something in it, and we're hoping like for like trying to reach new people. We're always trying to do that as well. But I think that's also part of the art of it is trying to see, can you communicate to somebody's interior need and have it resonate.
Right.
And that's what we're always working on. But yeah, sometimes you get to just see after you're done who it's hitting, and then you try to kind of refine your messaging to try to make sure that you're getting as many people who need to hear that word. Oh, somebody's saying something nice about your Spanish.
Oh, fantastic.
Sorry, y'all. The chat keeps on flashing in and out. It kind of strobes. So right now it's showing nothing to us.
I mean, it's interesting to think about the true power of a song to actually kind of either put you in someone else's perspective. I think if you just hear a verse that just gets you excited, or a beat that just makes you move, like those are just really immediate feedback that can brighten up your day. But I know sometimes for me, if I hear somebody say something that like no one else has said, it's like finally this has been said. That can feel really important. But so more and more, I feel like going into the songs, yes, with like a mission, something you want to do, but also being open to kind of what is being felt in the world right now. So it's a combination.
Somebody was asking, I think they asked more than once about can we speak a little bit about what Buried Alive is about?
I'm trying to remember the very beginning of that song.
Think about that. Yeah. Think about it. And I'll say, how can we help you reach new people? Well, one of the things that we'll do is we're going to start trying to put out content on a more regular basis. And of course, we rely on all of y'all to amplify it. But it's on us to make something that is dope enough that you want to share it. So we'll try to hold up our end of the bargain. And if you find it that it's good enough, then we hope that you send it out to your people in the essence of saying, like, this is something that I want you to hear. So I think that would be the best way at this point in time, moving forward. We're going to give you good stuff, and then we hope that you all share it.
So I'm going to zoom out a little bit on the album No Enemies, because we wrote that when we were right in the mid, it was 2014, 15, 16, and right in the midst of a lot of the movement around police violence, Black Lives Matter movement. We were pretty connected with that here in Denver. And at the same time, we were noticing these young activists who were charging into the movement kind of almost from scratch, people who were very recently politicized and then would go through a full range of emotions and cycles of emotions, being really excited, feeling like, this march is going to do it, and then being disillusioned. And then there'd be moments of heartbreak and moments of tragedy and moments of failure. And so we tried to make the album really tells the story of that full spectrum of emotions. But one of the things we also were thinking about is that the album kind of centers around an incident that you never really learn exactly what it is, but something has happened, and there's been some kind of loss of life, most likely. And we wanted it to be this Rorschach where you didn't really know what had actually happened. You just knew there was someone suffering. And we partly wanted it to be unknown because we've noticed how even the act of reacting to tragedy is now politicized. Yeah. The second something happens, there's a shooting or something, instead of people saying, oh my God, this is horrible, we're so desensitized to that, then we start leaping to the next step of like, see, this is going to prove my point, or watch, everyone's going to say it to this person, but it's actually this type of person, therefore we just proved this point. And it's all about proving points and being right once again. And that to me just feels like you're a really grotesque way to go about that. So in the album, you'll see these different reflections of different people, kind of like echoes of incidents that you might have seen. And on Buried Alive, I think one of the verses is about, it has the line, each movement that I make can make a movement. And we were thinking about, what does it mean to have your hand on a gun, your hand on a badge, to be in control of other people's lives, knowing that a slight movement, a slight switch, a slight miscalculation could lead to something that could spawn an entire movement. And you might end up with one person dead and one person so vilified as to be unredeemable in the eyes of many. Absolutely.
See you, Robert. Thank you so much for coming in and checking this out. Stress fatigue. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Mike.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Mike. Thanks so much. We were following you saying like, oh, I'm gonna buy it. That's really cool of you to do that right here, right now. That's that's how this stuff keeps going. Let's see. We have pretty much time for about like one more question. So we're going to give you all the next few moments to try to put something forward. Let's see.
Any questions?
Any questions?
I mean, there's one that surfaced a few times that I think maybe we should take on. Somebody was asking about, I think someone maybe who's from Israel was asking about it, and was maybe asking about the song Wrestling Israel, but also just, there was a question, what do we think about Israel? And I think if we're talking about No Enemies, maybe it's worth sharing just a little bit of some of the connections we've had to.
I mean,
is this a different one?
I feel like that's an entire talk
fine.
in and of itself.
Okay.
Like to do that appropriately, especially like seeing as like we've gone on trips there and dabble with the language. I will not speak any, because I studied ancient Hebrew, so I don't speak it very well, but Jamie speaks a little bit. Let's see. Okay. Has creating this album allowed you to reconcile with any, quote, enemies you have? And that's not.
Okay, that's a good question.
I have some answers.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the answers is yes, because I do think that anytime that somebody is participating in enemy making, they're usually doing it with themselves as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so the real shadow side of enemy making is, as you start getting good at it, there's probably also parts of yourself that you're rejecting. Mm-hmm. And so in the process of even making this album, there were aspects of myself that I hadn't felt comfortable sharing before, like sharing my actual grief, like as I said before, in failure games, or sometimes like the overwhelmed nature of things that came up in Buried Alive. So I started I was trying to come in with the whole of myself, and even those parts of myself that I wasn't necessarily proud of, or parts that I tried to conceal from the world and myself. So I feel like even like with the parts of me that I was making enemies with, I was reconciling with, and that I think that helped me in the same way that I kind of changed my outlook outwardly after doing that.
Yeah, I think even just the fact of working on an album with that title kind of put that front and center all the time. So it became, it made it even more front and center to be like, all right, this is a commitment we're making. We're kind of making it publicly by titling this, and I don't think it's not a matter of like not being hypocrites, because it's not about purity. It's not like saying, oh, we don't have enemies because we have an album called No Enemies, but it is that like we recognize how difficult it is, and we're committing to like always holding out hope that whatever situation you might be embroiled in, and it might be one where because of safety you have no connection with somebody, and you would steer clear of somebody, and you have separation with somebody or they're separated from everybody else. But there's this holding out this faith, this commitment, this hope, this investment that there is some other version of that person, or some best version of that person, or truest version of that person, that could still yet take root and show itself, and could still yet sort of manifest. And that's just kind of part of like a core part of what I think it, personally coming from a faith perspective, that means. And yeah.
All right. And so last question, somebody's asked, a few people have asked about the sleeping giant and how it comes up several times in the album, and what does that mean to us?
Well, it's interesting because that image had come up a few years ago, even when we were working on Survival Story. There was an entire kind of background story to that album. You get little glimmers of it in the album, but some of the folks that were really dug in around that time got even a fuller picture of this storyline. And giants for us at that point had to do with like, we know that there's tides that need to be turned. We know that there's literally the water levels rising. There's threats from climate catastrophe right now this week as we speak. And there's these tides that need to be turned. And there's, in the story, people who turn the tide are the giants. But we know that like in this reality, the way to manifest a giant is to work together with other people, to create movements together, to create relationships together, to reach out and connect with people. And so there is a giant in each and every one of us, but it's especially there if we are open to connecting with other people.
The giant, as Jamie was saying, also that the giant is in our album cover.
Oh yes. Oh yeah, we should show them this one.
So in some ways, this kind of explains it a little bit. Of course, this is like Iron Giant influenced. I think it's one of the dopest movies ever made. But also, what we're saying is like you see all these people here. We're saying that these are the same thing. Like this giant is a manifestation of our collective power when we come together. When our tools are in hand, we can actually build ourselves into something that can be transformative, that can be peaceful and representative of all of us. And we feel like each of our communities, each of our homes, there's a giant sleeping in there. Like when we are able to stop stigmatizing aspects of ourselves and aspects of each other, we can actually be curious and hear each other, and then like kind of in some ways form Voltron and be able to do some really powerful and beautiful and compassion informed things. That's kind of our hope. And so that's even what this album, the album artwork represents.
Look how pretty it is.
Look how pretty it is.
This is our most beautiful album I think we've ever created.
Yeah, shout out to Josiah Werning and Dustin Dahlman for their incredible work. Yes, did somebody say something about this? Yes, the giant has open arms. Yeah. All right, y'all. So that's where we're at for right now. We hope that you all enjoyed this. We're going to be doing this like how often, Jamie?
At least once a month. And we're going to make sure to check out the comments you made and some questions you've asked that might have slipped by us. So yeah, we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks again. Y'all. Be kind and be curious.